The judge's gavel cracked, echoing the finality of the decree. $6,500 a month. Brenda, my ex-wife across the aisle, allowed herself a small, triumphant smirk, a subtle curl of the lip that tightened the knot in my gut. My lawyer just shook his head, looking at the floor. "Consider it a monthly reminder," her attorney muttered, his voice a low, gravelly sneer. Gary Peterson receives a divorce decree requiring $6,500 monthly support to Brenda Walsh. He believes Brenda used the lawyers to her advantage and vows revenge. Gary recalls his entrepreneurial past in real estate, vending, and coin-changing operations. He remembers Brenda's ambition, leading them to a $900,000 mansion in Wilmette in the end of their marriage. Gary plans to divert Megan's child support into a trust, ensuring Brenda receives nothing. The first $2,000 spousal support is delivered to Brenda's mansion in coins by an armored truck, observed by neighbors. Gary films the scene and taunts Brenda from across the street. Days later, Gary receives a contempt of court subpoena. Megan meets Gary, expressing anger at her mother and a desire to live with him, warning against violence. Gary informs Megan about the trust set up for her with Uncle Mark as trustee, excluding Brenda. In court, Brenda's lawyer, Mr. Jenkins, makes a sneering remark to Gary. Megan addresses the judge, requesting custody with Gary and criticizing her mother. The judge dismisses Megan's petition, citing undisclosed, inappropriate relationship allegations against Gary. Brenda's attorney moves for contempt against Gary, one for the coin payment and non-direct child support. Gary's lawyer is exasperated by the unfolding events. The judge's order lay on the table, crisp and final. $6,500 a month. My eyes tracked the figures, then drifted to the bolded name, Brenda Walsh. She had screwed the lawyers, worked them over with her paralegal charm, and now they were screwing me. It was a familiar pattern, Brenda getting her way, but this time it felt different. This time I wasn't going to take it personally. I was already plotting how to make her regret it. I grew up on the rougher side of Lansing, Illinois, learning early that nothing was given, everything was earned or taken. My early ventures had taught me about cash flow, real estate deals in rundown neighborhoods, vending machines stocked in forgotten factories, a small coin-changing operation that serviced laundromats and arcades. It wasn't glamorous, but it put money in my pocket, kept my hands busy. These businesses, I knew, would come in handy to pay back my loving ex-wife. She always liked things neat, clean, and respectable. Brenda had changed over the years. When we met, she was a stay-at-home mother, content with our life in Lansing. Then the ambition started to simmer. She went to paralegal school, started working at a big Chicago law firm. The firm was downtown, a towering glass and steel monument to success. She thrived there, climbing the ranks, her confidence growing with each promotion. That ambition, that relentless push for more, led us to the Wilmette Mansion, a $900,000 house sitting on manicured lawns. I never felt comfortable there. It was too big, too polished, too far from anything I recognized. It was the beginning of the end, though I didn't know it then. The divorce decree specified child support for Megan, $2,000 of that monthly sum. I wasn't about to let Brenda get her hands on that. Megan was my daughter and the money was for her. I decided I would divert the child support directly into a trust for Megan. Brenda wouldn't see a dime of it. The first payment was due on the 1st of the month. I had the armored truck arranged for precisely 9:00 a.m. It was a bright, clear Tuesday. The truck pulled up to the Wilmette Mansion, a dark, hulking presence against the neat suburban backdrop. $2,000 in quarters, nickels, and dimes. The drivers, serious men in uniforms, started unloading canvas bags onto Brenda's pristine flagstone driveway. Neighbors, watering their impatience and adjusting their sprinklers, stopped and stared. A few came out onto their porches, shading their eyes. I watched from my car across the street, filming the whole thing on my phone. When the last bag was dropped and the truck began to pull away, I rolled down my window, waving. "I hope you are enjoying your money," I yelled, my voice carrying in the crisp morning air. Days later, a man in a rumpled suit found me at my warehouse. He held up an envelope. "Gary Peterson?" he asked. I didn't reach for it. He threw the subpoena for contempt of court to the ground. It fluttered there, a white square on the concrete floor. Megan and I met for lunch at a diner off Route 30. She picked at her fries, her face tight. Mom is furious, she said, not looking at me. She was screaming about you and the coins. Megan pushed her plate away. I want to live with you, Daddy. I can't stand her anymore. She looked up, her eyes earnest. Just don't do anything violent, okay? I told her about the trust. Your Uncle Mark is the trustee, I explained. It's for your education, for your future. Your mother is not to receive any of it. Megan nodded slowly, a small knowing look on her face. Back in court, the air was thick with unspoken judgments. Brenda's lawyer, a man named Mr. Jenkins, caught my eye. He was a slick dresser, all expensive tailoring, and a smug smile. Hey, jerk, he sneered, his voice just loud enough for me to hear as I walked past him. You better follow the program. Megan, however, had her own plans. She stood before the judge, a slight figure but with a surprisingly strong voice. Your Honor, she began, I want to petition the court to have custody of my father and not that expletive, my mother. The courtroom hushed. The judge, a woman with tight gray hair and an unreadable expression, held up a hand. Megan, that's enough. She looked at me. Mr. Peterson, there have been allegations of an inappropriate relationship with your daughter. The words hung in the air, cold and unexpected. I looked at Megan, then at Brenda, who sat stone-faced beside her lawyer. My own attorney, Mr. Davies, squeezed his eyes shut for a moment. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Brenda's attorney then moved to find me in contempt for the coin payment and for not directly giving Brenda the child support. Mr. Davies just rubbed his temples, a silent admission of his frustration. Gary realizes Brenda used old psychiatric records regarding Megan against him. He understands the pedophile accusation was a tactic by Brenda. Gary confirms he paid child support to Megan and mortgage insurance directly to parties, not Brenda. The judge orders Gary to pay child support directly to Brenda and spousal support in certified funds. Gary leaves court, already planning a new, more subtle form of revenge. He begins investigating Brenda's law firm, noting their cash-intensive business dealings. Gary devises a plan to launder funds through the firm using his coin business network. His goal is to subtly tarnish the firm's and Brenda's reputation without her knowing he's involved. Gary arranges a summer road trip with Megan to strengthen their bond and distance her from the drama. He makes an anonymous call to the firm, hinting at financial irregularities to plant seeds of doubt. An anonymous email follows sent to senior partners, detailing questionable client accounts. Brenda's promotion confirms Gary's belief in her deep involvement with the firm's dubious practices. Gary recruits a straw man client with dirty money to approach Brenda's firm. The straw man, Mr. Smith, meets with Brenda and Mr. Jenkins to discuss large cash transactions. Gary observes Brenda's late nights at the firm, satisfied she's now entangled in his trap. The judge's words about an inappropriate relationship still hung in the air, a sour taste in my mouth. It didn't take long for the pieces to click. Brenda. She must have dug up something from years ago, some old psychiatric file, twisted it to plant that seed. It was a dirty trick meant to paint me as a pedophile in the judge's eyes, to discredit anything Megan or I said. She had used Lily, a family therapist we saw briefly after a rough patch, against me. Lily tried to paint me as a pedophile then too, years ago when Brenda was pushing for sole custody. Brenda didn't invent the lie. She just revived it. It was a low blow, even for her. The judge, her expression firm, laid out her ruling. I was to pay the child support directly to Brenda, and the future spousal support had to be in certified funds, no more change. My lawyer, Mr. Davies, gave me a look that said, just follow the rules, Gary. I nodded, a tight, controlled movement. I had paid Megan's child support into her trust as planned, and the mortgage and insurance on the Wilmette house had gone directly to the bank and the insurance company. My logic was simple. The money was for Megan, and the house needed to be kept up. Brenda could handle her own bills with the spousal support. The judge didn't see it that way. Leaving the courthouse, the sharp Chicago wind felt colder than usual. Brenda had won this round, at least the public one, but I wasn't done. I'll do exactly what he said, I thought, the words a silent promise to myself, but it will be done in a way that she won't enjoy. The coin delivery was blunt force. What I had in mind next would be surgical. My existing businesses, the real estate, the vending machines, the coin operations, they had taught me about cash. And cash, I knew, always left a trail, or a lack thereof, that could be exploited. Brenda's law firm, a prestigious outfit in the Loop, handled a lot of corporate clients. But I started looking into their public filings, making a few discreet calls to old associates in the city. Some of their clients were cash-intensive businesses, restaurants, nightclubs, even some high-volume retail. It was a world I understood, a world ripe for opportunities, both legitimate and otherwise. The plan began to form. I would launder funds through Brenda's law firm. Not my own money, not directly. My coin business, with its constant flow of legitimate cash, gave me access to certain types of individuals. People who dealt in cash, people who might have cash they wanted to clean, to make disappear and reappear looking legitimate. I would connect them discreetly to Brenda's firm. The firm would handle their legal needs, perhaps even help them invest. My goal wasn't to expose illegal activity immediately, but to subtly tie Brenda and her firm to increasingly dubious practices. Their reputation would decline. Hers would too. She wouldn't even know it was me. It was a long game, a slow bleed. That summer, I took Megan on a road trip, just us. We drove through Wisconsin, up to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, then across to Minnesota. We saw lakes, small towns, ate bad diner food. We talked about school, her friends, anything but the divorce. We laughed. I wanted to strengthen our bond, to get her away from Brenda's escalating drama, the poison that seemed to seep into everything. She needed a break, and so did I. Once we were back, the wheels of my new plan started turning. The first step was to plant the seeds of doubt. I made an anonymous call to the firm's general line, asking for a partner not named Mr. Jenkins. I used a payphone outside a gas station in Gary, Indiana. My voice was modulated, slightly distorted, a low rumble. I mentioned rumors, hinted at irregularities in a few client accounts. Nothing specific, just enough to make someone wonder. Then came the email, sent from a burner account I'd set up months ago. It went to several senior partners, detailing questionable client accounts I had supposedly discovered through my own industry connections. The information was vague but sounded plausible, weaving together publicly available facts with speculative financial transactions. A few weeks later, I heard Brenda got a promotion. She was now a senior paralegal, handling more high-profile clients, likely including those cash-intensive businesses. It only reinforced my belief that she was actively involved, perhaps even orchestrating some of the questionable activities I was laying the groundwork for. She was deepening her own grave. My network eventually led me to a man named Arthur Vance. He ran a small contracting company, known for accepting large cash payments, often from sources that preferred anonymity. He was my straw man. I presented the idea carefully, promising him a percentage of whatever fees the firm charged. He knew I had my reasons for wanting to involve Brenda's firm. He didn't ask questions. Soon after he, now calling himself Mr. Smith, had an appointment with Brenda and Mr. Jenkins. He was looking for legal counsel to handle some large, discrete cash transactions. I drove past the firm late that night. Brenda's car was still in the lot. She's caught hook, line, and sinker, I thought. A quiet satisfaction settling over me. Soon, rumors started circulating within the legal community. Whispers about Brenda's firm, their increasing reliance on cash-heavy clients. The pressure was mounting. Gary plants anonymous tips with federal authorities regarding the law firm's cash dealings. Brenda's firm faces audits and investigations, causing internal panic and mistrust. Brenda tries to reassure partners about the firm's legitimacy, but doubt persists. Gary continues making public change payments for spousal support, often via armored cars or dumped at her door. Brenda's neighbors and friends begin to ostracize her due to her public humiliation and the firm's troubles. Megan notices her mother's declining social status but remains loyal to Gary. Mr. Jenkins expresses concern to Brenda about the firm's cash-rich clients, finding them off. Gary introduces another straw man as an investor to clean money through Brenda's firm. Brenda, desperate to save her position, pushes for the new investor despite Jenkins's warnings. Gary leaks details of the firm's questionable client roster and financial dealings to an investigative journalist. A damning article appears, exposing the firm's suspicious activities and naming Brenda. Clients withdraw, and partners question Brenda's judgment and loyalty. shattering the firm's reputation. Megan asks Gary if her mother is involved in illegal activities. Gary feigns ignorance, stating Brenda makes her own choices. Brenda confronts Gary, accusing him directly of orchestrating her downfall. The subtle hints I'd been planting were starting to bear fruit. My next move was to raise the stakes. I used a public phone again, careful with my words, hinting at the firm's increasingly cash-intensive client roster, the unusual payment structures, the sheer volume of unreported funds. I gave anonymous tips to federal authorities, specifically the FBI and the IRS. My focus wasn't on directly accusing, but on drawing attention, forcing them to look closer at the firm's practices. I provided just enough breadcrumbs to spark official curiosity without leading them directly to my involvement. Soon, the firm started to get audited. First, internal reviews, then, a few weeks later, letters from federal agencies. The internal panic was palpable, even from my distance. Distrust began to spread among the partners. Brenda, I heard through my network, was trying to assure everyone that everything was above board, that these were just routine checks. But the doubt gnawed at them. She was, after all, the one who'd brought in many of these new clients. I kept up my part of the game too. The spousal support payments continued, always in full public view. Sometimes an armored car would arrive, depositing bags of coins on her driveway. Other times I'd simply arrive in my beat-up pickup truck, dump buckets of quarters onto her front porch, making sure to make noise, to draw attention. The sheer weight of the metal, the clinking sound, became a symbol of her public humiliation. Neighbors would pause their walks, their conversations, their lawnmowers, to stare. Brenda's carefully curated image in Wilmette, the successful paralegal in her million-dollar home, was crumbling. Her former friends, the other perfectly coiffed women from the country club, started to distance themselves. Gossip, I knew, traveled faster than any rumor about a law firm. Megan observed it all. She saw the way her mother's phone rang less often, the way fewer cars were parked in Brenda's driveway. She saw the articles, the looks from neighbors. She expressed concern, a frown etched on her young face, but her loyalty to me remained steadfast. She had chosen her side. Mr. Jenkins, Brenda's former champion, started to show cracks. I heard he expressed unease to Brenda about the firm's new cash-rich clients. "Brenda," he was overheard saying one afternoon, "this feels off. We're taking on a lot of risk here." His words, filtered through my contacts within the firm, were music to my ears. He was starting to suspect. I leveraged my network again. This time I introduced another straw man, a man named Robert Shaw, an old acquaintance from the coin business who understood the shadows. He posed as a potential investor, someone with discreet funds looking to clean money through legitimate channels. Brenda, desperate to save the firm's reputation and her own position, pushed for the new investor. Mr. Jenkins warned against it, citing the growing federal scrutiny and the suspicious nature of Shaw's proposal. But Brenda was beyond listening. She was cornered, and desperate people make bad choices. She saw Shaw's investment as a way to staunch the bleeding, to prove her worth. Once Shaw was fully embedded, meeting with Brenda and providing the firm with increasingly questionable funds, I made my next move. I ensured details of the firm's client roster, their financial dealings, the volume of cash, were leaked to a local investigative journalist I had discreetly approached months earlier. I provided enough verifiable facts to make it impossible to ignore. The article hit the local paper 3 days later. It wasn't just a small blurb, it was a front-page expose. The headline screamed about dubious dealings in the loop, highlighting the firm's suspicious activities, the high-volume cash clients, the unverified sources of funds. It named key figures, including Brenda Walsh, as instrumental in bringing in these clients. The firm's reputation shattered. Clients began to pull out, some discreetly, some loudly. Partners, once unified in their ambition, now openly questioned Brenda's judgment, her loyalty, her very ethics. Megan brought the article to me one evening. Her finger traced the headline. "Dad," she asked, her voice quiet, "is Mom really involved in something illegal?" I looked at the paper, then at her. My face remained impassive. "Your mother makes her own choices, Megan," I said, my voice flat, devoid of emotion. "She always has." It wasn't long before Brenda confronted me. She pulled her car up behind my truck outside a hardware store, screeching to a halt. She got out, her face red, her hands trembling. "You're doing this, aren't you?" she shrieked, her voice hoarse, attracting the attention of people loading lumber. "You're doing this, you sick bastard!" Brenda, facing professional ruin, exhibits erratic behavior, drinking heavily and lashing out at Mr. Jenkins. The law firm collapses under investigations and negative press, with partners resigning and clients leaving. Brenda is fired from her job, leaving her career in shambles. Unable to afford the Wilmette mansion, Brenda struggles with mortgage payments, while Gary secretly covers his portion. Gary orchestrates subtle acts of sabotage against Brenda, like changing her mailing address for junk mail and sending bizarre anonymous deliveries. Megan becomes increasingly concerned about her mother's mental state, noting her decline. Brenda attempts to reopen the custody case, accusing Gary of harassment, but the judge dismisses her claims. Gary maintains meticulous documentation and an ironclad alibi for every incident Brenda attributes to him. Brenda's attempt to obtain a restraining order against Gary for stalking is denied due to lack of evidence. The Wilmette house is foreclosed, leading to Brenda's financial ruin and her move to a small rented apartment. Gary expands his vending machine business, strengthening his financial position as Brenda's crumbles. Gary observes Brenda's decline from afar, feeling a fleeting, almost pitying pang at her hollow appearance. Megan, growing more independent, starts a part-time job, further distancing herself from her mother's drama. Brenda enters a relationship with a shady former client, accelerating her downward spiral. Gary subtly manipulates Brenda's catastrophic health insurance terms, making her access to care more difficult. Brenda's confrontation at the hardware store was just the beginning. Facing professional ruin, she started to unravel. Her calls to Mr. Jenkins, once filled with professional assertiveness, turned into desperate pleas, then drunken rants. He grew distant, avoiding her. The firm, a once proud institution, crumbled under the weight of investigations and negative press. Partners, seeing the writing on the wall, began to resign, taking their clients with them. The reputable facade cracked, then shattered. Eventually, the inevitable came. "We can no longer afford your services, Brenda," the managing partner told her, his voice devoid of warmth. Her career, built on ambition and ruthless calculation, was in shambles. The Wilmette mansion, once a symbol of her ascent, became a burden. She struggled with the mortgage payments. "Even as I fulfilled the court order by sending my portion of the housing costs directly to the bank, knowing she wouldn't see the money, I saw the bank statements. The late notices, the mounting fees. It was a slow, agonizing process. I continued my subtle attacks. I used her public divorce records to change her mailing address for various junk mail lists. She started receiving catalogs for incontinence products, pamphlets for funeral homes, and endless solicitations for dubious credit cards. Anonymous deliveries of bizarre items would occasionally appear on her porch. A single deflated balloon, a bag of stale bread, a small dead plant. Nothing illegal, nothing directly attributable to me, just enough to keep her on edge, to chip away at her sanity. Megan, now back from our road trip, noticed. "Dad," she said one evening, her voice hushed. "Mom isn't doing well. She seems to be falling apart." Her concern was genuine, but it was tempered with a growing understanding of her mother's past actions. She saw the consequences unfolding. Brenda, desperate, tried to reopen the custody case. She accused me of harassment, of orchestrating her downfall. She stood before the same judge, her face drawn, her accusations wild and unfocused. But I had meticulously documented everything. Every payment, every phone call, every single movement I had made since the divorce. I had an ironclad alibi for every incident she described, every anonymous delivery, every changed mailing address. The judge, her expression weary, saw through it. Brenda's petition was dismissed. She then tried for a restraining order, claiming I was stalking her. Again, she had no evidence, only her frantic suspicions. The request was denied. Each failed attempt chipped away further at her credibility, leaving her more isolated, more desperate. The Wilmette house, the symbol of Brenda's ambition, was eventually foreclosed upon. The for sale sign, then the foreclosed sign, became permanent fixtures on the manicured lawn. She lost everything she had worked for, every polished surface, every expensive upgrade. She moved into a small, rented apartment in a less desirable part of Evanston, a suburb just south of Wilmette. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling mansion. While Brenda's world crumbled, mine expanded. I acquired more vending machine routes, bought out a small local competitor. My financial position solidified, a steady, quiet growth in stark opposition to her spectacular collapse. I observed Brenda from afar sometimes. A quick drive past her new apartment, a glimpse of her at the grocery store. She looked different, thinner, her shoulders slumped, her once immaculate hair unkempt. She looked hollow. A fleeting pang of something almost like pity flickered most within me, a ghost of an emotion, quickly suppressed. It was the consequence of her choices, of her ambition, of her cruelty. Megan, sensing the shift, started working a part-time job at a local bookstore. She was saving money, building her own future, further distancing herself from her mother's toxic orbit. She was a survivor. Brenda, meanwhile, fell into a relationship with a shady character, another client from her old firm, a man named Victor Rossi, who dealt in speculative real estate and had a reputation for aggressive business tactics and a fondness for dark bars. He encouraged her drinking, her downward spiral. He was another user, another opportunist. My final manipulation was subtle, almost invisible. Through careful research of public policy changes and a few well-placed anonymous calls to various agencies, I subtly manipulated the terms of Brenda's catastrophic health insurance. It was designed to make it even harder for her to access care, to jump through more hoops, to face more delays if she ever actually needed it. Just another layer of burden, quietly tightening the noose. Brenda's new partner, Victor Rossi, draws her into minor criminal schemes including shoplifting and credit card fraud. Gary learns of Brenda's new association and activities through his network, observing her hitting rock bottom. Megan expresses disgust and disbelief upon discovering her mother's criminal lifestyle. Gary decides to renovate and rent out the Oak Forest house, a tangible link to his past. Victor isolates Brenda, further severing her remaining support systems. Despite his animosity, Gary feels a flicker of concern regarding Megan's reaction to her mother's fate. Gary installs discreet surveillance on Brenda to monitor her activities and protect Megan from exposure. Brenda and Victor are caught shoplifting, leading to a police report and further public disgrace. Megan reluctantly visits Brenda's squalid apartment, a painful encounter reinforcing her choice to live with Gary. Brenda begs Megan for money, accusing Gary of turning her daughter against her, driving Megan away in tears. Gary tightens his financial control, ensuring Brenda's dependence on minimal spousal support, always paid inconveniently. Brenda's lawsuit against Gary for emotional distress and financial sabotage is weak and dismissed. Stress and an unhealthy lifestyle cause Brenda's health to decline, with her high-deductible insurance offering little help. Victor abandons Brenda as her health worsens, leaving her alone and destitute. Gary experiences a grim satisfaction mixed with a growing sense of emptiness as his revenge culminates. Brenda's descent accelerated with Victor Rossi. He wasn't just a bad influence, he was an active participant in her unraveling. My contacts in the city, the same ones who'd helped me track the firm's dealings, started relaying new information. Brenda and Victor were getting into minor criminal schemes. Shoplifting from department stores, using stolen credit card numbers for online purchases. Small-time stuff, but enough to register on the periphery of the criminal world I'd sometimes brushed against. "She's really hitting rock bottom," one of my guys, a former bouncer, told me over a greasy plate of eggs. His voice was flat, matter of fact. Megan found out, not from me, but through the whispers of their old social circle. She came home one afternoon, her face pale, her jaw tight. "I heard about Mom," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The shoplifting. With that guy, Victor." She shook her head, a deep disgust in her eyes. "I can't believe this is my mother." It was a confirmation of her darkest fears. While Brenda spiraled, I decided to do something about the Oak Forest house, the old place where we'd started, before Will met, before the ambition took root. It had sat empty, a ghost of a past life. I decided to renovate it, bring it back to life, then rent it out. It was a tangible reminder of where I came from, a stark contrast to where Brenda was now. Victor, meanwhile, tightened his grip on Brenda. He isolated her, cut her off from any remaining thread of her old life. He was a parasite feeding on her desperation, her dwindling resources. I felt a flicker of concern, not for Brenda, but for Megan. How much more could she witness of her mother's destruction before it scarred her too deeply? To ensure Megan's protection and to keep tabs on Brenda's escalating recklessness, I installed discreet surveillance on Brenda's new apartment. A few strategically placed cameras, nothing obvious, feeding into a secure server. I needed to know her every move, to anticipate any move that might threaten Megan, or inadvertently drag her into Brenda's mess. The inevitable police report arrived a few weeks later. Brenda and Victor were caught shoplifting a pair of designer sunglasses from a boutique on Michigan Avenue. The report was brief, factual, but it confirmed everything. Another layer of public disgrace etched into official records. Megan, driven by a lingering sense of duty, visited Brenda in her new apartment. She came back quiet, withdrawn. The apartment was squalid, reeking of stale cigarettes and cheap liquor. It was a painful encounter, a stark image of what Brenda had become, further reinforcing Megan's decision to stay with me. Brenda, desperate, begged Megan for money during that visit. "Your father's doing this to me," she accused, her voice slurred. "He's turned you against me." Megan left in tears, the accusation a cruel twist of the knife. I tightened my financial control further, ensuring Brenda remained dependent on the minimal spousal support, always paid in the most inconvenient ways. Cashier's checks that needed to be picked up from a distant bank, or once, an old money order from a defunct post office. Brenda, fueled by resentment and Victor's bad advice, tried to sue me again, this time for emotional distress and financial sabotage. Her case was weak, based on paranoia and circumstantial evidence. It was dismissed quickly, another futile attempt, another drain on her non-existent resources. The stress, the drinking, the unhealthy lifestyle, all took their toll. Brenda's health began to fail. Nagging coughs turned into chronic bronchitis. Minor aches became constant pain. The high-deductible insurance I had subtly manipulated offered little help. She couldn't afford the co-pays, the specialist visits. When her health worsened, Victor abandoned her. He was a fair-weather opportunist, not a caretaker. He disappeared as quickly as he arrived, leaving Brenda alone and truly destitute. Watching it all unfold, I felt a grim satisfaction. The revenge was complete. She had lost everything. But with that satisfaction came a growing sense of emptiness. The goal was achieved, the tormentor brought low. Yet the victory felt hollow. It was over. But what was left? Stay around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. Brenda is arrested for a serious crime, potentially linked to a former client of her defunct firm, a situation orchestrated by Gary. Gary experiences internal conflict, grappling with the severity of his actions as Brenda faces jail time. Megan is devastated by her mother's arrest, affirming her connection as "still my mom." Uncle Mark warns Gary about the long-term emotional toll of his vendetta, saying hate eats at you. Gary justifies his actions by recalling Brenda's courtroom lies and initial betrayal. Brenda's trial becomes a public spectacle, with Gary observing her fall from grace. On the stand, a broken Brenda admits to manipulation, but still blames Gary for her downfall. Prosecutors briefly investigate Gary's anonymous tips but find no direct link to him. Megan testifies as a witness, a traumatic experience as she navigates loyalty to both parents. Gary faces new, unrelated business challenges, shifting his focus to his enterprise. The judge delivers a harsh sentence, condemning Brenda's actions and perceived lack of remorse. Brenda is sent to prison, making Gary the sole custodial parent for Megan. Gary experiences an anticlimactic, hollow victory, lacking the expected joy. Megan begins therapy to cope with the trauma of her parents' divorce and her mother's downfall. Gary finds himself increasingly isolated as old friends are unsettled by his vindictive nature. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Not to me directly, but I heard it through the same channels that relayed news of her shoplifting. Brenda Walsh had been arrested, not for petty theft this time, but for something more substantial, connected to an old client of the defunct law firm, a figure involved in a complex fraud scheme I had helped expose. It was the result of a meticulously planted tip, a carefully constructed scenario that finally tied her to the firm's shadier dealings. She was essentially a fall guy, implicated in a web of deceit she had helped spin. As the news sank in, a cold wave washed over me. Prison. Actual jail time. Was this too far? The question, unbidden, whispered in the back of my mind. The architect of her ruin, I found myself grappling with the enormity of what I had set in motion. Megan was devastated. Despite everything, the distance, the disappointment, Brenda was still her mother. "She's still my mom, Dad," she said, her voice small, tears welling in her eyes. It was a raw, unfiltered pain that twisted something inside me. Uncle Mark, a man who had seen his share of life's rough edges, visited a few days later. He sat across from me in my living room, nursing a cup of coffee. "Gary," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "this kind of hate, it eats at you. You might get what you want, but what's left of you then?" His words hung in the air, heavy with truth. I tried to justify it, to myself, to the silent judgment I felt from Mark, from Megan. I reminded myself of Brenda's lies in court, of the inappropriate relationship accusation, of her initial betrayal. She had tried to turn Megan against me, tried to ruin my reputation, destroy our family. She had started it. I had merely finished it. Brenda's trial was a public spectacle. The local papers covered it daily, detailing the firm's collapse, the fraudulent schemes, the money laundering allegations. I attended, sitting in the back, a silent observer. I watched her, a ghost of her former self, as her carefully constructed life was torn apart on the stand. On the third day Brenda took the stand. Her voice was weak, broken. She admitted to being manipulated by Victor, by the firm's senior partners. But even then, she still blamed me. "My ex-husband," she croaked, her eyes darting towards my corner of the courtroom. "He set all of this in motion. He ruined my life." It was a desperate, predictable play. The prosecutors, for a brief period, looked into the anonymous tips that had initiated the firm's investigation. They traced IP addresses, phone records. But my methods were clean, untraceable. They found no direct link to me. My tracks were meticulously covered. Megan was called as a witness. It was a traumatic experience for her. She had to navigate the impossible landscape of loyalty to both parents, to tell the truth without destroying one or the other. She spoke clearly, factually about her mother's erratic behavior, her struggles, her living situation. She never directly accused, but her testimony painted a bleak picture. Amidst the legal drama, my own world wasn't static. New business challenges arose. A competitor started undercutting prices in my vending machine routes. A key supplier went bankrupt. I was forced to focus on my enterprise, to push the specter of Brenda's trial to the back of my mind. Life, I realized, didn't stop for revenge. The judge delivered a harsh sentence. She condemned Brenda's actions, her apparent lack of remorse, her reckless disregard for the law. She spoke of the victims of the fraud, the trust betrayed. Brenda was sentenced to a term in state prison. Brenda was sent away. I became the sole custodial parent for Megan. The victory was complete, but it was an anticlimax. There was no joy, no rush of triumph. It felt hollow, exactly as Uncle Mark had warned. The fire of revenge had burned out, leaving only ash. Megan, meanwhile, began therapy. She needed to deal with the trauma of her parents' bitter divorce, her mother's downfall, the public humiliation. She was strong, but even the strongest people have their limits. I found myself increasingly isolated. Old friends, once quick to commiserate about Brenda, now kept their distance. The vindictive nature of my actions, the extent of my calculated revenge, was unsettling. Even to those who had once applauded my initial defiance, there was a quiet judgment in their eyes. The line between justice and cruelty, I realized, was thinner than I had ever imagined. As Megan matures, she begins to question the severity of Gary's revenge against Brenda. Megan's therapist encourages open communication with Gary, leading to tension. Gary defends his actions, citing Brenda's betrayal and his desire to protect Megan. Brenda sends letters from prison, expressing remorse and seeking forgiveness, but Gary intercepts them. Megan discovers some of Brenda's hidden letters, creating a deep rift with Gary. Megan gains financial independence through her trust fund, allowing her to make independent choices. Gary expands his businesses into new states, using it as a distraction from his personal turmoil. Megan begins dating, finding solace outside the family drama, but Gary remains wary. Brenda's parole hearing approaches, and Megan wishes to attend, despite Gary's objections. Gary fears Megan will forgive Brenda and distance herself from him. Brenda is denied parole, and Gary feels a momentary relief, followed by guilt. Megan is disheartened by the parole denial, feeling her mother is enduring excessive punishment. Megan's therapist suggests Gary also seek counseling for his anger and control issues. Gary reflects on old photos, remembering the early, happier days with Brenda before the bitterness. Gary sells the Oak Forest house, severing the final tangible link to his marriage with Brenda. Years passed. Megan, now in college, had matured. The sharp edges of her grief had softened, replaced by a more nuanced perspective. She started to question things, the extent of my actions. "Dad," she said one evening after a particularly quiet dinner, "didn't you go too far with Mom?" Her voice was gentle, but the question landed hard. Her therapist, a calm, observant woman I'd never met, was encouraging Megan to communicate these feelings to me. It created a tension between us, a new and unfamiliar distance. I found myself defensive, explaining, justifying. "She lied, Megan," I said, my voice tight. "She hurt us. She tried to take everything." I spoke of the accusations in court, the betrayal, my desire to protect her, to shield her from Brenda's recklessness. But the words felt hollow, even to my own ears. From prison, Brenda sent letters. They were sporadic at first, then more frequent, filled with remorse, pleas for forgiveness, promises to change. They arrived addressed to Megan, but I intercepted them. I held them for a few days, reading them, before discarding them in the trash. I didn't want Brenda's poison seeping back into Megan's life, stirring up old wounds. But secrets rarely stay buried. Megan eventually discovered some of the letters. Not from me, of course, but during a deep clean of the house, a box she found in the attic. The discovery sparked a deeper rift between us, a silent accusation in her eyes. "Why did you hide these, Dad?" she asked, her voice trembling. There was no easy answer. With her 21st birthday, Megan gained full access to the trust fund I had set up years ago. It gave her financial independence, a freedom to make her own choices, to chart her own course, unburdened by my past and her mother's ruin. She bought her own car, moved into an apartment closer to campus. It was a good thing, I told myself, but it also felt like another form of distance, another step away from me. I continued to expand my businesses. New vending machine routes in Indiana, a coin-op laundry chain in Ohio. It was a distraction, a way to channel my energy, to avoid the quiet of my own thoughts. The hum of machines, the clink of coins, was a more comforting rhythm than the unresolved emotions within me. Megan started dating. A young man from her college, earnest and kind. She found solace outside the family drama, building a life that was distinctly her own. I remained wary, protective, but also conscious of the space she needed. Brenda's parole hearing came up. Megan expressed a desire to attend. "I just want to see her, Dad," she said, her voice soft but firm. I argued against it, citing the emotional toll, the manipulation, but her resolve was clear. This was her mother, and she needed to confront that reality, whatever it was. My fear was a cold knot in my stomach. I feared Megan would forgive Brenda, would turn away from me, leaving me truly alone in my hollow victory. The thought was a bitter pill. Brenda was denied parole. The board cited her past record, her lack of stable support, her perceived inability to accept full responsibility. I felt a momentary relief, a tension in my shoulders easing. Then a wave of guilt. Was this what I wanted? More years in prison? More suffering? The line between justice and cruelty blurred even further. Megan was disheartened by the decision. "She's paying too high a price, Dad," she said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "It just doesn't feel right anymore." Megan's therapist, through Megan, suggested I also seek counseling to deal with my anger, my control issues, the lingering shadows of my vendetta. The suggestion stung, but I let it pass without comment. One evening, alone in the house, I looked through old photos, albums tucked away in a dusty box, pictures of Brenda and me, young, smiling. Before the ambition, before the bitterness, before the Wilmette house, before the lawyers, before the divorce. She looked different then, lighter. I remembered the way her laugh used to fill a room. The memories were distant, almost foreign. I finally sold the Oak Forest house. It had served its purpose, a safe haven for Megan, a place of stability. With the sale, the last tangible link to my marriage with Brenda, to that old life, was severed. The chapter was closed, leaving me adrift in a new, quieter reality. Brenda falls gravely ill in prison, her health deteriorating rapidly. Gary receives news of Brenda's critical condition, facing the choice of allowing Megan to visit. Megan desperately pleads with Gary to see her mother before she dies. Gary experiences inner turmoil, torn between his vindictive nature, his love for Megan, and a faint sense of morality. Gary reluctantly agrees to Megan's visit, accompanying her on a tense, silent journey. On her deathbed, Brenda expresses profound regret and apologizes to Megan and Gary. Gary stands, unable to offer forgiveness, his anger remaining a tight knot within him. Brenda dies shortly after Megan's visit. Megan mourns her mother with a complicated grief for their broken relationship. A small, somber funeral takes place, attended by Gary, who observes the sparse attendance. Brenda's meager will leaves personal items for Megan and a handwritten letter for Gary seeking peace. Gary reads the letter, feeling emptiness and the cold recognition of his absolute final victory. Megan, now an adult, begins to distance herself from Gary, his lingering bitterness creating a barrier. Gary, despite his financial success, finds himself profoundly alone, realizing the high cost of his revenge. Gary starts having recurring dreams of Brenda as the young woman he once loved, not his enemy. The news came through the prison chaplain, a brief, impersonal call to my home number. Brenda Walsh was gravely ill. Her health, already compromised by stress and neglect, had failed rapidly. Liver disease, complications from years of heavy drinking, exacerbated by the harsh realities of prison life. She was not expected to live long. A choice presented itself, stark and unforgiving. Let her fade, a quiet, ignominious end. Or allow Megan to visit, to say goodbye. The thought of extending any kindness to Brenda, even now, chafed. But then I pictured Megan's face, her quiet sorrow after the parole hearing. Megan heard the news, not from me, but from the chaplain, who had also called her directly. She approached me, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice urgent. "Please, Dad," she pleaded, "let me go. I have to see her before she dies." I battled with myself. The years of vindictive planning, the calculated moves, the grim satisfaction of her downfall, all of it screamed at me to refuse, to maintain the final absolute separation. But then I saw Megan, her genuine distress, her need for closure, the faint whisper of my own morality, long buried under the weight of my anger, stirred. This was not about Brenda anymore. It was about Megan. I reluctantly agreed. The drive to the prison was tense, silent. Megan stared out the window, her hands clasped in her lap. I drove, my jaw tight, watching the familiar Midwestern landscape blur past. The prison itself was a stark, imposing structure, gray against the muted sky. Inside, the medical ward was quiet, sterile. Brenda lay in a bed, a thin, frail shadow of the woman she once was. Her skin was sallow, her eyes sunken. She looked up as we entered, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to peace crossing her face. Megan approached the bed, her breath catching. Brenda reached out a hand, weak and trembling, to Megan. "My baby," she whispered, her voice raspy. She turned her eyes to me, a profound regret in their depths. "I'm so sorry," she choked out, tears tracing paths down her hollow cheeks. "For everything." She apologized to Megan, for her failures, her absence. She apologized to me for the lies, the pain, the betrayal. I stood there, a silent sentinel, hearing her words, feeling their weight. But the knot of unresolved anger, years in the making, remained tight within me. Forgiveness felt impossible, a betrayal of everything I had done, everything I had lost. I could offer no absolution. Brenda died 2 days later. The prison notified us. It was over. Megan grieved. It was a complicated grief, a mourning for a complex, broken relationship, for a mother who was both loving and cruel, present and absent. She cried for the woman Brenda once was, and for the life that could have been. The funeral was small, somber. A handful of prison staff, a distant relative, Megan, and me. I attended, a silent, unmoving figure in the back row, observing the sparse attendance, the quiet finality of it all. There was no grand ceremony, no outpouring of emotion, just a quiet burial. Brenda had left a meager will. A few personal items for Megan, a small locket, some old photographs, a faded recipe book, and a handwritten letter for me, tucked inside a worn Bible. It was short, only a few lines, asking for peace, for an end to the bitterness. I read the letter in my quiet house. It brought a strange mix of emptiness and the cold recognition that my victory was now absolute, final. There was nothing left to fight for, no more battles to win. It was a complete triumph, but the taste was ash. Megan, now an adult, began to pull away. My lingering bitterness, the quiet anger I still carried, became a barrier between us. She was building her own life, one free of the shadows of our past, and I was, increasingly, being left behind. I was financially successful. My businesses thrived, but I found myself profoundly alone. My revenge, so meticulously planned, so completely executed, had cost me more than I had realized. The years spent in pursuit of her ruin had left me empty, isolated. I started having recurring dreams, not of Brenda the enemy, the paralegal, the woman who betrayed me, but of Brenda as she was in the beginning. Young, vibrant, laughing. The woman I had once loved, before the world, and we, had changed. The echoes of vengeance, I realized, resonated loudest in the silence that followed. Megan leaves for college, eager to build a life free from her parents' past. Gary attempts to reconcile with Megan, but his past actions create a lasting barrier. Uncle Mark gently confronts Gary, questioning the ultimate worth of his revenge. Gary retreats further into his businesses, finding a hollow satisfaction in material success. He sells the Wilmette mansion, finally shedding the symbol of Brenda's ambition and his downfall. Gary has a chance encounter with Mr. Jenkins, now a successful and respected lawyer. Gary reflects on his personal legacy, weighing his empire against the cost to his soul and his daughter's relationship. Megan makes independent life decisions, sometimes deliberately going against Gary's unspoken wishes. Gary realizes his revenge merely replaced one burden with another, failing to cleanse him. He quietly acknowledges that his vindictiveness ultimately caused him more damage than Brenda. Gary considers therapy, a thought he once dismissed, recognizing the heavy toll his anger has taken. He begins writing a letter to Megan, struggling to articulate his past actions and their complex motivations. Gary continues his life, successful in business, but forever marked by the choices he made. Megan flourishes in her chosen path, resilient and building a future distinct from parental conflict. The story concludes with Gary contemplating the unchanging Midwestern landscape, echoing his past and its price. Megan left for college the following fall. She packed her car with a quiet efficiency, a sense of eager anticipation radiating from her. She was ready to build a life entirely her own, a future free from the long, tangled shadows of her parents' past. It was a good thing, I knew, but her departure left an even deeper silence in the house. I tried to bridge the gap between us, sending her money, calling regularly, asking about her classes, her friends. But my past actions, the elaborate orchestrations, the chilling effectiveness of my revenge cast a long shadow. There was a distance in her voice, a quiet reserve that I couldn't penetrate. The ease we once shared was gone, replaced by careful consideration. Uncle Mark visited again, his eyes kind but unwavering. We sat on the porch, watching the last of the autumn leaves fall. "You got your pound of flesh, Gary," he said, his voice soft. "Every last bit of it. Was it worth it?" He didn't wait for an answer, just looked out at the bare trees, letting the question hang in the crisp air. The question resonated with an uncomfortable truth. I retreated deeper into my businesses. New ventures, more acquisitions. The vending machine empire grew. Coin laundries dotted the map across 3 states. There was a hollow satisfaction in the material success, in the sheer act of building, of controlling. But the lightness I once sought, remained elusive. Each new achievement was simply another brick in a wall of solitude. The Wilmette Mansion, that grand, empty symbol of Brenda's ambition in the beginning of my downfall, finally sold. The transaction was clean, impersonal, no fanfare, no emotion, just papers signed, keys handed over. It was like closing a book I had no desire to reread. One afternoon in the Loop, I had a chance encounter with Mr. Jenkins. He was stepping out of a gleaming black sedan, impeccably dressed, a briefcase in hand. His firm, I had heard, had recovered under new leadership, and he had risen to a senior partner position. He nodded curtly, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, before disappearing into a towering office building. He was a respected lawyer, successful, unblemished by scandal. A stark living contrast to Brenda's fate, and perhaps to my own. I often reflected on my legacy, a man who had built an empire from nothing, through grit and determination. But at what cost? What of my own soul, now scarred and hollowed out? What of my relationship with Megan, the one person I truly cared for, now fragile and distant? The answers were unsettling. Megan, meanwhile, was flourishing. She chose a major I wouldn't have picked for her, pursued interests I didn't fully understand. She made independent decisions about her life, sometimes deliberately going against my unspoken wishes, asserting her own identity, her own freedom from my influence, from my past. It was a quiet rebellion, born of her own need to define herself. The weight of the past was a constant companion. I realized the revenge I exacted didn't cleanse me. It merely filled me with a different kind of burden. The satisfaction had been fleeting, replaced by a lingering emptiness. The emotional landscape within me was as barren as a winter field. Quietly, sometimes in the dead of night, I acknowledged it. My vindictiveness, my relentless pursuit of retribution, had ultimately damaged me more than it had Brenda. She had paid her price, but I too was paying mine. A new thought began to surface, tentative and foreign. Therapy, a suggestion I would have scoffed at years ago, seeing it as a weakness, a concession. Now I considered it, realizing the profound toll my anger had taken, the deep, unhealed wounds it had left. Perhaps it was time to find a different kind of reckoning. I started writing a letter to Megan, an attempt to explain, to articulate the whirlwind of emotions, the complex motivations that had driven me. But the words were difficult, clumsy. How do you explain a life fueled by bitterness to someone who seeks only peace? I struggled with the phrases, the apologies, the justifications. I wasn't sure if it would ever truly be understood or accepted. Word count 869 life, in its relentless way, continued. I continued my life, successful in business, my name known in certain circles, my empire growing. But I was forever marked by the choices I made, the price of my revenge etched onto my soul. The quiet satisfaction of growth was always accompanied by the silent, aching void. Megan flourished in her chosen path, her resilience a testament to her strength, creating a future that was distinctly her own, separate from the parental conflict, from the ghosts of her past. She built a world where I was a distant, if supportive, figure. The Midwestern landscape stretched out, vast and unchanging, under the endless sky. Within me, the echoes of my past and the price I paid for my vengeance quietly resonated, a constant, low hum in the vast silence.